Hugh Freeze is back in the SEC with a second chance, now the head coach at Auburn. The former Liberty coach and former Ole Miss coach heading back to the Plains in an attempt to revitalize a program that is accustomed to contending for SEC West championships and every 5 or 10 years contending for national championships. Auburn siding with a coach who has shown a consistency as a winner on the field in 3 different stops, or I should say 4 different stops. He's won 10 games in at least one season, including at Liberty and at Ole Miss in the SEC. He comes to Auburn with a program that's really not necessarily on the mend, but really kind of in the dumps with its recruiting and with its talent as far as on the roster right now. But because of the transfer portal, he comes in with an ability to be able to kind of turn things overnight. Maybe not as quickly as what we saw this past season at USC, which is suddenly a playoff contender, but maybe get Auburn back into the hunt in the SEC West. So what does Auburn get with Hugh Freeze? We're going to get to that as well as some intel about how this search panned out for Auburn and whether this is a good fit or not from Auburn from my sourcing here. At Liberty, at Ole Miss, at Arkansas State, and at Lambuth University, where he previously coached, his offenses are electric. The passing game is very complex. The running game is pretty simplified, but it's successful. At Liberty, he had top 20 offenses and defenses, got that program into the top 25, and was particularly dangerous with Malik Willis at quarterback. And here's what makes this story so interesting. Malik Willis was a backup quarterback at Auburn under Gus Malzahn, good friends with Hugh Freeze, by the way, and he transferred to Liberty looking for playing time, became the starter, and Hugh Freeze developed him into a third-round draft pick in the NFL. Again, Mississippi State former athletics director John Cohen, hired by Auburn on Halloween, went in there looking to hire a coach who can develop quarterbacks, develop players, but also can grab these players out of the transfer portal and be successful. And when he was at Ole Miss, remember, he had the 2 best recruiting classes in Ole Miss history, top 5 recruiting classes in 2013 and 2016. The other thing with Hugh Freeze and why he makes sense for Auburn is that he's going to fit in with the culture there. What do I mean by that? Stick with me here for a second. I covered Auburn on the ground for the better part of 8 years. Auburn I've called the most fantastical place in the SEC because it is capable of so many great things on the field, on the basketball court, but also they tend to shoot themselves in the foot sometimes. And they have the highest of highs and the lowest of lows there. But the culture there, they talk about Auburn family a lot, and they legitimately mean that. They stick by the Auburn creed about doing work and hard work, blue collar mentality. And it's also an atmosphere that there's a lot of, Christianity involved, a lot of religion involved in the undertones there. And Hugh Freeze is a very, very religious man, as you guys have seen, obviously on social media and throughout his career there. He's also a very open and personable coach. He's one who's going to open the doors there at Auburn to the fans, but also the boosters alike. He's someone that I think if you wanted to combine 2 coaches and 2 coaches most recently at Auburn, he's going to be a mix of Gus Malzahn's kind of business-like approach and being a offensive coach that calls amazing plays, and also very open like Tommy Tuberville was, and being very open with the media and also with the fans there. So put those 2 together, Tommy Tuberville and Gus Malzahn, that's Hugh Freeze to a T. Is it going to work at Auburn? Who knows? I'm done with the days of trying to predict whether a hire is perfect or not, especially after what we saw with Scott Frost going back to his alma mater, Nebraska, and failing there. But on paper, Hugh Freeze just makes a lot of sense on the football field. When he was at Ole Miss, he developed All-Americans and Cody Pruitt, Senquez Golson, Robert Kimdichie, Laramie Trussell, Evan Ingram, Laquan Treadwell, Trey Elston. A bunch of names there. He got Ole Miss up to number 3 in the national rankings twice in back-to-back years. They were ranked 27 straight weeks in the top 25. Amazing accolades. But then there are negatives. And you guys know this with Hugh Freeze. There's a reason why he's at Liberty right now. He had to resign at Ole Miss when during an NCAA investigation and also a lawsuit, it was revealed in phone records that he had used a university phone to call numbers that were attached to escort services. And he had to resign after the 2016 season in the wake of that. The NCAA, meanwhile, came down with some sanctions that ripped away 27 of his 39 wins, tied to some improper benefits that were given to recruits. And while Hugh Freeze was not cited as having not overseeing the program correctly or receiving a show cause, he was tied to all of that and was criticized for not overseeing his program the right way. So he revitalizes his career at Liberty, and that's great. He's winning 8 games a year there, winning 10 games, in fact. But then the social media aspect gets back into it, and we cannot ignore that right now, especially here when something popped up this past summer with him. And as you guys may have seen with the Inside Higher Education story, this has been verified by Inside Higher Education. He reached out to a former Liberty student, Chelsea Andrews, who was involved and filed a lawsuit against Liberty, accusing the university of mishandling sexual assault cases. Now, Hugh Freeze wasn't around this and wasn't tied to this, and neither was the athletics director, I believe, Ian McCaw, who was hired away from Baylor. But what she was doing was on Twitter, she was criticizing the hiring of Ian McCaw there as athletics director because of his past at Baylor and the Baylor football program in particular in their handling of similar circumstances. And then Hugh Freeze apparently on Twitter direct messaged her criticizing her criticism of Ian McCaw, which she found to be strange and a little bit creepy. And she tweeted out a screenshot of it, which the Inside Higher Education publication verified. It does not appear Hugh Freeze has talked about this directly or anything like that, but I'm sure he's going to be asked quite a bit about just how his personality, how he handles these things, especially for a man who is obviously considers himself very godly and is going into a program where Christianity is very important and has a lot of undertones there. So there's going to be possibly some awkward situations there in his introductory press conference and as the months go along, because this is a hire that is going to be criticized and is being criticized heavily by both the national media and some groups out there. And so Auburn had to go their way of vetting this completely and thoroughly. And in my reporting the last few weeks on this whole thing, Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss was Auburn's #1 target. But when that started falling apart late last week, they started going after Hugh Freeze really hard, who they've been talking to and through his reps for several weeks. And as early as November 10th, and probably earlier than that, I can say this from my sourcing, Auburn was vetting Hugh Freeze as a candidate and reaching out to people in Hugh Freeze's past to discuss what was going on at Ole Miss and also beyond, and whether he is a changed man and how he's handling things today at Liberty. So Auburn was doing that, and they felt comfortable enough, at least on their end, that they had vetted him enough. We can make the hire here. And this quote from John Cohen in their announcement on Monday evening is what stood out to me. Quote, John Cohen said, "After a thoughtful, thorough, and well-vetted search, we ended where we started with Hugh Freeze. Of all the candidates we considered, Hugh was the best fit. Fit has several meanings, but the most important factors were student-athlete development, football strategy, recruiting, and SEC experience." So Auburn feels comfortable with the hire, but they will face a lot of questions, both publicly and, of course, privately, even among the boosters there, once he gets on the ground. But they feel like they're comfortable enough to move forward. Obviously, they're very comfortable with his on-the-field success, which cannot be questioned. He's won 10 games everywhere he has gone. So what are Hugh Freeze's first tasks there at Auburn? One, he needs to rally that fan base. It's fractured after everything that happened under Brian Harsin, his 21-game stand there, where he was an absolute disaster. He didn't connect with boosters or fans very well. He alienated people, and their talent there on the roster was abysmal. Hugh Freeze, as I said, is going to fit in very well with the culture there. He's probably going to have open practices, both for fans and also for boosters behind closed doors, things they haven't seen there since Tommy Tuberville was on the Plains. And as you know, Tommy Tuberville is a U.S. Senator now, is all about kissing babies, and that's exactly how he was at Auburn. Very public, a bubbly personality, and everybody loved to talk to him. He was the type of coach who would go to a restaurant there in town and have breakfast at the same spot every time, at the same time, once a week, so any fan could come up and talk to him. Hugh Freeze might not do that, but he's very similar to Tuberville in that aspect. Outside of that, He's going to win over the fans, I think, over the course of several months. But his number one task is improving recruiting at Auburn. Auburn's recruiting has really been abysmal in the SEC these last 2 to 3 years, including the final years of Gus Malzahn. And I would argue it's been on the downward trend for the last 4 years, particularly with what they've been doing or haven't been doing with offensive line recruiting. Their offensive line recruiting has been among the worst in the SEC over the last 5 recruiting cycles, and it's still trending that way right now. Hugh Freeze needs to fix that. How can he do that? When that transfer portal opens up December 5th, he needs to be going after a lot of offensive linemen because he's got to replace the bulk of those starters from this past season, and he's also got to build some depth there. He pretty much needs to fill holes on every spot on this roster. There just isn't 5-star to 4-star top talent across the board there that you need to compete in the SEC. And for that matter, they don't have the depth to compete right now in the SEC as well. Auburn's number 32 in the 24/7 Sports Composite with 13 commitments. That ranks 10th in the SEC heading into 2023 signing day. And in comparison, 2022's class ranked 21st, which is 9th in the SEC. Again, in the bottom half of the SEC. That does not fly at Auburn. And that was a big reason why Brian Harsin was fired, in addition to everything that was going on off the field with alienating players. And of course, losing games. Hugh Freeze has got to kill it on the recruiting trail and, more importantly, in the transfer portal here over this next month and a half to 2 months. And here's the thing about Hugh Freeze. I spoke to him 23 days ago after they had beaten Arkansas on the road, if you remember, and I was asking about the Auburn job. He very much wanted it. And when I asked him about it, he said, hey, quote, I don't know that Auburn wants me. I have no clue. But I know this. I have won everywhere I've been, and my staff and kids have turned programs fast. It's our culture that we instill. I know we do that, and the proof is in the pudding. Well, he's got to continue that at Auburn, and he's got to do it quickly. And here's the thing, the key word there, he turns programs fast. He needs to do that at Auburn to get people on his side. Winning cures all, and it's got to start that offensive line. And he maybe needs to go find a quarterback, though Robbie Ashford really showed out in these last 4 weeks of the regular season, including in the Iron Bowl. So Hugh Freeze, good fit, culturally, yes, but a lot of feedback and backlash from the public, both Auburn fans, some of them, and of course on the national stage. But again, he's got to put on blinders. He is Auburn's man. Nothing's going to change about that. He's got to go recruit. That is number one. He's got to go find big-time talent to turn that program around. Otherwise, he might be another Brian Harsin here in 3 years. I think, personally, Hugh Freeze will get it done as far as on the recruiting trail, and he'll be able to put the pieces in place to have Auburn competitive maybe as early as this upcoming season in 2023. But it's going to be fascinating to watch this all transpire and whether Hugh Freeze can repeat some of the success he had at Ole Miss or better. Because number one, on the field, he beat Alabama twice, and that is everything in that state. Beating Alabama, beating Nick Saban. The only person with more wins against Nick Saban right now, it's Gus Malzahn, who they fired and is now at UCF. So a lot of pressure there. Hugh Freeze is going to have to start delivering almost immediately.